Hey everyone, good morning. It's Frank Quinn, Director of Preservation for Heritage Ohio. Welcome to, can you believe it? It's already day 9 of the Heritage Ohio Conference. We are so happy to have you here with us this morning. I am here with Francis Hamilton and Aquaman, silly me, I mean Devin Miles, our office manager. And actually we have Mariangela Pfister in the room with us. Joyce Barrett is off on assignment this morning, but she will be back with us this afternoon. Quick item to get out of the way. We had a fabulous pitch party last night. And if you would like to check out our pictures and would like to vote for your favorite pitch, you can go to our website, Heritage Ohio, and check out the pitches and vote for your favorite. The voting closes today at 5 o'clock, I believe. So it's already a great competition. We'll see who ends up getting the $1,000 pitch party prize. So want to give a special thanks and a shout out to Perspectus Architecture. We have Elizabeth Murphy of Perspectus joining us this morning. She's going to be introducing our speakers and introducing our session. So at this point, I will say, Elizabeth, take it away.
Thank you, Frank. So Ohio is ranked in the top 3 states in the nation for number of tax credit projects and amount of money reinvested in our historic built heritage. Ohio's success in using the federal and state tax credits is due to the efforts of Mariangela Pfister and her staff at the State Historic Preservation Office, and Lisa Brownell and her staff at the Ohio Department Services Agency. Perspectus Architecture's Historic Studio is pleased to support their informative session today on how to best use these tools on your projects. Mariangela Pfister is Department Head and Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer for Technical Preservation Services and heads the Technical Preservation Services Department, managing the Building Doctor program, answering questions about care of older structures, and working with applicants for the Federal Rehabilitation Investment Tax Credit and the Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit. She has developed a wood conservation presentation, has written articles on preservation topics, and continues to work on a series of fact sheets entitled Fast Facts on Common Old Building Maintenance Issues. Pfister holds a master's degree in history from the Ohio State University and a bachelor's degree in history, English, and secondary education from Capital University. And one other point that I would like to make about Mariangela, I have had the privilege of working with her for 25 years, and I'm pleased to introduce her. Lisa Brownell serves as the Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program Manager for the Ohio Development Services Agency. She earned an MA and a PhD in geography from the University of Kentucky with a focus on cultural landscapes, historic preservation, and the ways communities value places. This is a very good program from my experience. A constant theme throughout her research has been abandoned landscapes, and she is thrilled to be working with communities to rehabilitate buildings for new uses. So thank you, and we look forward to hearing what Mariangela and Lisa have to share with us today.
And one piece of housekeeping item before I turn it over to Mariangela. This session has 1.5 HSW AIA continuing education credits. I'm posting the information right now into the chat box. But if you would like credit for this session, just remember to email me at officemanager@heritageohio.org with your request for a certificate, and if you're looking to have me submit your information for AIA, your member number as well. Thank you, and I'm turning it over to Mariangela.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you for that very kind introduction. It's frankly thanks to the consultants and the applicants that we work with throughout Ohio that really help make this program so successful. We just began round 25 of our Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program on Monday. That's our state tax credit program. And it is the largest round since the very first couple of rounds. So we are so pleased that so many historic buildings are being rehabilitated in Ohio. So I'm really pleased to join Lisa Brownell even virtually. ODSA has been a tremendous partner with us in the state program, and the National Park Service has been incredible working with us, being our mentors and being just really good partners in the federal program. So we are very pleased to be here sort of virtually. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that next year for Heritage Ohio we'll actually be able to be back together. I'm going to stay positive about that. So this morning, my focus is going to be on the federal historic preservation tax credits. The federal historic preservation tax credits have several differences with the Ohio historic preservation tax credits, which I'm going to call optic. First of all, they're 20% tax credit on your qualified rehabilitation expenditures, and they're a joint program between the National Park Service and the Internal Revenue Service. The National Park Service decides if the work meets the standards, which we're going to be talking about in a second, and the Internal Revenue Service actually gives you your tax credits. Where do we come in? We are the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, and we do the review for the National Park Service as to whether or not the work meets the standards. So this is a rehabilitation program. It is not a restoration program. However, if you do restoration work, it absolutely is acceptable, but you don't have to. A rehabilitation program is when you take a building and you use it for something that's compatible through repair, alterations, and additions, while keeping those things about the building, those features which make it historic, give it its architectural significance. So on your screen, you see a couple of befores and afters, an exterior warehouse before and after, and an interior before and after. So what makes these things significant? Well, on the industrial building, it's the windows, it's the smokestack, it's the way the building is shaped. All of those things are retained in the after. And then on the interior, this is a clear one. It's the details like this interior stair, which are kept after. So again, I mentioned that there's some differences between the 20% federal historic tax credit program and the optic program. First of all, the federal program is not competitive. There are no rounds and there are no caps. You get 20% from your qualified rehabilitation expenditures regardless of what you spend. It's 20%. The property must be income producing, and it must be considered a substantial rehabilitation per IRS requirements. What does that mean? In very layman's terms, very, very, very layman's terms, you have to spend at least $1 more on the QREs, your qualified rehabilitation expenditures, than what the building is worth minus the land. There's a joke that the IRS tells us. They say, we don't do windows, so don't you answer financial questions. So that is the extent of what the financial piece of the presentation is going to be. That's in a nutshell what the substantial rehab requirement is. The properties have to be historic. They have to be listed either individually or within a district and considered contributing to the district on the National Register of Historic Places. That is the only way to qualify a building as historic on the National Register for the federal credits. And that's a little bit different than the state credit. So the work must meet the Secretary of the Interior standards, and we're going to be talking about that. And again, they are standards for rehabilitation. What we look at is the material and visual impact of the proposed work. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you aren't impacting the historic material and we can't see, there is no visual impact, then it's not going to come into conflict with the standards. There is a 5-year look back period for the 20% federal historic tax credit. So that means 5 years after final certification, all work must continue to meet the standards. That's because they don't want to certify, the Park Service doesn't want to certify a project as being completed and meeting the standards, and then 2 days later, something is done that doesn't meet the standards. So for 5 years, they have a look back period. The state of Ohio has basic submission requirements to facilitate reviews. We're going to be talking about we call them BSRs, and why we have them in place. We strongly recommend that work not begin until the National Park Service has made their decision. With the optic credit, you aren't supposed to begin work until the optic award announcements are made. However, the way that Ohio's system was set up initially is you are often going to receive your decision from the SHPO on your optic credit before the Park Service may even have looked at your project. So we very seriously suggest that you await federal decisions before beginning the work. We do our best to align those two reviews. We work really hard to make sure that those two reviews align, but still it's a prudent approach to wait for the federal decision. So I've been talking a lot about the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. There are 10 general principles. They've been around literally for decades, and they have been tried and true. They have not changed. They have really been a good way to complete a sensitive rehabilitation project because they focus on preserving historic character, repair rather than replacement, compatibility of alterations. They apply to all types of historic buildings, and they apply equally to exterior and interiors. So standard 1 asks us to find a compatible use. That's pretty straightforward, and this one's easy peasy. This was a classroom, and now it's an open office space. It's retained its historic ceilings. It's even retained its blackboards. It's got its 2/2 windows, very compatible. Standard 2 asks us to preserve historic character. The building on the left, it's in over the Rhine, certainly needed some work, but the things that made it significant, the roof line, the dormers, the windows, the storefronts, all retained. Standard 3 asks us not to create a false sense of history. This is the Sycamore Cafe in German Village on the left. It has retained its historic character. The kick plates at the storefront windows weren't brick historically, but other than that, this building has made it through time pretty well. Can't say the same for the building on the right. It's gotten what we call a phony colonial do-over. That would not meet the standards. This is probably the most challenging standard for people to understand. And that's because I just got finished saying that any additions have to be compatible to the historic building. Well, this is not, the storefront, some would say, is not compatible. It's a deco storefront on a clearly Italianate building. That's not super compatible, is it? However, that deco storefront has gained significance in its own right. So standard 4 would say you need to keep that deco storefront. Standard 5 asks us to preserve his distinctive features. This is a Holzer Hospital. This is the entrance on the left, and they rehabilitated this on the right, and it's a beautiful entrance area. This is not in Ohio. This is in Pennsylvania, and I call Standard 6 the mother of all of the standards, and that's because Standard 6 asks us to repair rather than replace historic fabric. Why? Well, because if you replace all of the historic fabric, then what you're left with is not a historic building any longer. You're left with a building that looks historic, but really isn't. So we ask that you repair rather than replace. But if the material is damaged beyond reasonable repair, if it simply cannot be repaired, then we ask that you match it closely so that there is no visual impact. Remember, I talked about material and visual impact a couple minutes ago. Yes, you're impacting the material because the material has been determined to be beyond reasonable repair, but so as to minimize the visual impact, you're going to match that as closely as you can. Standard 7 is the do no harm standard, whether it's sandblasting or air blasting or soda blasting or whatever it is. It's not a good idea to do that to a building. However, Standard 7 extends beyond just the exterior envelope. It's do no harm to any portion of the historic material of the building. Standard 8 is our archaeology standard to protect significant archaeological resources. I've been doing this a very long time. Elizabeth mentioned she and I have been working together a very, very long time. And I have only used this standard once, and it was on Music Hall in Cincinnati. And it was really interesting to go through that process and to work with archaeologists on that project. And at the end, we met Standard 8. Standard 9 asks us to ensure that additions are compatible. And this is a project in Cleveland. This is actually an infill building versus an addition, although they did connect. And you can see the infill building in the middle. It didn't mimic anything exactly of the two historic buildings on either side, which were both historic tax credit projects, but it's certainly compatible. Standard 10 asks us to ensure that additions are reversible. This addition would almost be easy to miss. It's a vestibule that was created, an airlock, all in glass, except obviously for the framework of the doors. That addition can be popped out without any damage to the historic material. So again, there's no material impact of this, and so that would meet the standards. So how do you apply for the federal credits? First of all, you have a preliminary meeting with the State Historic Preservation Office. They are not required for the federal credit. They are required for the optic credit. And because most of our projects do combined federal and optic, almost all of our projects do a preliminary meeting, but they're just a good idea. They're just a good idea to come in and meet with SHPO staff and get some of your things looked at before you actually get wedded to the project. They're informal, they're non-binding, they're a discussion, they're not a final recommendation. If you bring photos and drawings and a good idea of what you want to do, that's definitely going to facilitate the discussion. We will red flag for you potential issues, and we'll also talk with you about the basic submission requirements. We'll give you reminders about that, and again, I'll be talking about that in a second. Our applications for the federal credit are available online and through the State Historic Preservation Office. We are not currently open to the public. However, review staff is in the office partially, so you will be able to contact us by phone. We're very good about answering email. And I am thrilled beyond measure to tell you that we are now doing the transmissions to the National Park Service of the federal tax credit projects again. That was something we were very anxious to get back to, and we were unable to do it during the initial lockdown. But since June 29th, we've been able to transmit. So since June 29th, everything now must be submitted hard copy to our office for transmission. We ask for an electronic copy as well, just because staff is still partially remote, so that there is no slowdown of your review. But we can't require that. We only request that, but we are requiring, just like back in the old days, we are requiring the physical receipt of all materials for transmission to the feds. Minimum level of documentation must be submitted for all parts of the application in order to be reviewable, those basic submission requirements again. The SHPO cannot change application cover sheets. The IRS came down pretty hard on all SHPO offices. That cover sheet is considered a contract. IRS explained to us that it's a contract between the owner and the IRS, and we're not supposed to change it. So please make certain all the fields are completed. You're using the most up-to-date form. It'll have in the upper left corner a revised 2016 on it. All boxes must be checked. Those boxes are the banes of all of our existence. Believe me, I feel for you. We just cringe when we get an application in and the box hasn't been checked and everything else is fine. So please make sure you check the appropriate boxes, and please, please, please make sure that the applicant's signature is original and that it's dated when it's signed. You can't post date it. You can't leave it blank. It has to be signed. We got a batch of applications in this round. The applicant's signature was original, but it wasn't dated. So all of those cover sheets have to be redone, and they have to be re-signed because We can't just send them back and say, okay, add these on. First of all, nothing is allowed to come out of our office once it's in our office. We can't send it back anyway, but they have to be re-signed and dated for when they're actually re-signed, because again, they're a contract between the applicant and the IRS. So the owner submits a hard copy for review to the State Historic Preservation Office. The SHPO makes a recommendation to the National Park Service, and let me add here that for the optic credit, the SHPO makes a final decision to ODSA for the state credit. But for the federal credit, the SHPO makes a recommendation to the National Park Service. The Park Service makes the final certification decision, and they notify the applicant. And again, the SHPO's decision for the state is a recommendation, and that is what's required to certify an optic project as having met the standards. So what's the time frame? So there's a 30 calendar day review from the time the complete application is received. However, we have to shorten that up almost always. I say sometimes abbreviated. It's almost always abbreviated towards the end of the round, because we've got to keep the applicant on time and eligible, and we don't want to have them miss any deadlines as far as when I have to make send decisions to DSA. So they're 30 days, 30 calendar days for SHPO review, but we're going to probably have to squeeze that as we get towards the end of the round. When additional information is required, the 30-day clock begins anew. That's why it's in your best interest to come and meet with us in a pre-application meeting. Get all your ducks in a row before you make your submission, because if you do that, the chances of your getting your project put on hold more than once or maybe twice get much better. And that's what you want. You don't want your project put on hold more than once or twice. For projects that are also applying for optic, a 10 business day response is needed. We have now shifted. We heard back from a lot of consultants that said, you know what, just have one time frame. It's just easier for us because most, as I said, most projects begin optic, but only the ones that are awarded by DSA continue on with optic unless they reapply. And we got that. We heard that message that its consistency is so important. Being predictable is so important to consultants. I hear that over and over again. They want to hear the same thing all the time so that they can plan, and that's reasonable. That is a minimum expectation that you all should consider from us, should expect from us. So we've really gone to a 10 business day response for everything, whether it's federal or optic. We're going to ask you for a 10 business day response. Now, is that rigid? No. If you need a couple days and you talk with your reviewer and say, you know what, if I just had another day or two, I'll be able to get you all the information, your reviewer is going to work with you. The only time the reviewer would have to be firm about that deadline is if we are up against an ODSA deadline that we want to keep you on track for. 2 copies of everything have to be submitted, and I mentioned that they have to be hard copies. The SHPO reviewer will really work with you on your project submission. We honestly believe, and this is not a trite statement, it's honestly true, that we are on the buildings team and we want the building to be successful. And so we will work with you on your project submission. Once the application is ready, the SHPO recommendation is made and the SHPO review and project materials are sent to the Park Service. The Park Service is going to begin their review once the applicable federal application fees have been paid. We don't have anything to do with the fees. That's all through the Park Service. I'm going to go very quickly through the various application parts. The part 1 is going to be required for any building unless it is a single building that is individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places. For example, Cincinnati Union Terminal is a single building that is individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Not to mention, it's also a National Historic Landmark, but it's individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's a single building. It did not need a Part 1 application. It gets to skip over that process. Everybody else has to do a Part 1. Even if you're listed in a National Register Historic District, which is great, because remember, you have to be National Register listed in order to qualify for this program. But you have to submit a Part 1 so that the Park Service can make a determination in concert with the SHPO as to whether the building contributes to the district. We have to have true before photos. This is super important. You will knock yourself out of Part 1 consideration if you do not have true before photos. Regardless of whether work is proposed for an area or not, you must photograph the entire building inside and out, all the way around, up and down. It is time sensitive. If you complete the work prior to the submission of a federal Part 1 application, you will likely not qualify for the federal tax credits. That is an IRS rule. Part 2's, it's the meat of the application process. All projects must meet all 10 of the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, and we find out if that's the case with a Part 2 application. Now, the standards do not require you to take an action. What do I mean by that? If you've inherited something, let's say you've inherited drop ceilings, and those drop ceilings, obviously in the building that you're in, do not meet the standards. You are not required to remove those drop ceilings in your project because you didn't do it. It was done by a previous owner. However, if you touch those drop ceilings, if you choose to do work, then the work that you do must be in conformance with the standards. And again, we look at material and visual impact. How are you impacting the historic material? What will it look like at the end? I've been mentioning these basic submission requirements. The focus is on material and visual impact, and they cover mechanical systems. Basically, what we're asking for there is if you tell us what your plenum space is, what your largest system feature is, if you show us schematically where it's going to go, if we know that the joists are running the right way so that you can get your systems in, then you're going to meet the basic submission requirement for your systems work. That's really important. Several years ago, we had some projects that the architect drew the systems where they thought they could go. They had a letter from an engineer that said, yep, the systems can go there. And it turned out that the footer had extended further than they thought, and they couldn't run the chases where they had wanted to run them. And it turned out that they ran them, they didn't contact us, and they ran them in front of some storefronts, and all of that had to be remediated. We do not want that to happen. We do not want the applicant to, at Part 3, which I'm going to be talking about here in a second, that's the final piece, we don't want you to have to do any remedial work. So we want you to be able to meet the standards throughout the process. And the way to do that is to submit the information at the front end through these basic submission requirements, which are state. They are not federal requirements. They are state information submission requirements. And we do these because it gives us a better idea of what the project involves from the beginning so that we can make a solid recommendation so that at the end, if you do what you said you were going to do and what you got approved for, at the end, you'll be able to be approved. We also ask for in the BSRs to talk to us about changes to finishes, features, and surfaces, and you must explain what is underneath. So if you've got modern flooring, if you've got gypboard, if you've got drop ceilings, and you intend to touch those areas, you intend to do work to those areas, we need to know what's underneath, behind, and above so we can make an assessment as to whether the work that you're proposing is going to meet the standards. We need to understand about the alteration of historic spaces. We need to know about storefront work, rooftop work. For rooftop work, unless you can tell us it's not visible from the ground, the Park Service does require physical mock-ups for rooftop work. But if you can say it's invisible from the ground, you don't really need to do that except say it's invisible from the ground. We need to understand about new additions and remember the standards that I talked about a second ago. New additions have to be compatible. We, of course, need to know about windows, but you aren't always going to know your exact window at the very start of the project. So we're going to want to see and hear that you are doing a compatible window. There's language that the Park Service recommends, and then you may get a condition on the window work if you don't have the exact window, and lots of times people don't. But remember, the first threshold that you must cross for window work, if you have historic windows in place, is that the current windows that you have, if they're historic, are damaged beyond reasonable repair. Remember standard 6. If the windows are not damaged beyond reasonable repair, we're going to want those windows retained. This BSR is also encompass masonry work. We want to know where the work is going to happen, what you're going to do, how much of it is going to happen, and then exterior colors. Basically, we don't need to know your actual number. You know, are you going to do a light color? Are you going to do a darker color? You know, what's the tone? It's that kind of thing. It's not, you don't have to give us a specific color, but that's just to make certain that the colors are appropriate. And then anything else that is critical to your project. These are just very basic pieces of information. But if there's something else that's critical to your program, then you're going to want to tell us that as well, so that we can give you a recommendation as to whether we feel it meets the standards. So if new work is needed to make the project function for the desired use, the details of that work must be included in the part 2. If you don't have those details, then we're going to suggest that you defer and wait until you have that information. You can also phase a project. If you go beyond 24 months, then you can phase it up to 60 months, and then you can explain it to us via the amendment process once you do have details on the next phase. If you have work that is critical to your project, but it's not yet detailed and you intend to phase it, it is a really good idea to talk through that work with your Part 2 reviewer, even schematically, because maybe it's something that they're going to red flag, maybe it's something that they have a concern about, and you're going to want to know that right from the front end. Let's say that talking about the windows again. Let's say you know that you need to do window replacement. You don't have the windows selected yet. We're going to want to ensure that those windows are compatible to the building. So we may put a condition. Conditions are do or deny. We do not put conditions on projects lightly. I hear from a lot of consultants that they don't super like conditions because they're financial people, look at conditions and they don't think the project was actually approved. It was only a conditional approval. Does that really mean approval? So we really try to be thoughtful. We really try to work with you before we place a condition. But sometimes, you just don't have the information, and so we have to place a condition on it. But we do not condition for information. That's super critical. That is not what conditions are for. Conditions are for an outcome. The condition's going to read XYZ must be this at the end of the process and meet the standards, period. That's the condition. And then you can go along as part of the condition and say, and this information must be submitted in order for us to determine that the work meets the standards. But conditions are, you must do this thing, or the project will be denied at the end. So that's what conditions are all about. Only proposed work that you demonstrate is feasible. Going back to the MEPs, I said, we just need maybe a schematic drawing. It doesn't have to be full-blown mechanicals, because often people don't have those at the beginning. If you have full-blown mechanical drawings, great, but those aren't going to be required, because those, especially with sprinkler work, those tend to be done last. Schematic plan, we can kind of visually see where you're putting things. We know how much plenum space you have because you've told us in the narrative. We know what your largest system feature is because you've told us in the narrative. But you're telling us these things, and so we're able to figure out that work is feasible. You can actually do the work that you say. So we believe you when you tell us, but we are mandated by the Park Service to verify that what you're telling us can actually be done. And so that is why we have to demonstrate, we have to understand, rather, you have to demonstrate and we have to understand that the work that you're proposing is feasible. We should be able to walk away from your project narrative, which, by the way, is the only thing that is binding to the applicant, because that's what the applicant signs. We need to be able to walk away from that narrative and basically know what the project is, and only have to go to the drawings for the visuals. And by the way, not every project requires drawings. If you don't have a project that's big enough, they may not need drawings. So this whole process is really easy. If you propose feasible work and you have that work approved by the Park Service and you complete the work as proposed, you will facilitate your certification. There is no reason why you won't be given Part 3 certification at the end of the day. There are no fees for the SHPA review, as I mentioned. There are federal fees, and I've given you the website here to go for the federal fees. There is an appeal process. If a project is recommended for denial and the Park Service upholds the denial, you do have the option to appeal that to the Chief Appeals Officer. Appeals were held in Washington. I don't know how they're doing them right now. Fortunately, in Ohio, we have very, very few appeals because we just fortunately do not have denials in Ohio. I was talking to the head of the program at the Park Service, and he was giving us a little pat on the back because Ohio just doesn't have denials, and we want to keep that going. And the way that we keep that going is by working together as a team and only proposing work that meets the standards. So amendments are what you submit when you have to make a change, because you don't, even though we try through the basic submission requirements to get at the information at the front end, you just can't know everything all the time. So consider an amendment like a mini part 2, and it also can be used to describe work that you're going to be, phasing the next phase. And amendments, really, truly, we're asking you to not begin the work until you get approval from the feds on any amendment. That is part of the federal process. That is a federal rule. So only the feds can approve a federal project. So we really ask that you wait on that. We do our best to get amendments in through the office as quickly as we can. We understand that you have men and women maybe on the ground waiting for approval of something that you found. We get that. So we really try to move it forward as quickly as we can. The way that you can help us with that is provide us all the information first time out of the gate. If you do that, then maybe there's only going to be a couple questions that we have to understand what you're presenting, but that's really going to speed you along. And then part 3s are the final thing that you submit to us, and they should be the easiest of all of the application pieces. You're going to submit photographs of everything, the entire building, whether you did work or not, or whether the work was done and paid for by somebody else, doesn't matter. The Park Service considers the entire project, all work must meet the standards, and it has to be finished. You cannot submit a part 3 if the work is not finished. That is straight up, we have to put it on an immediate hold if the work isn't finished. You can't leave the building in a less finished state than what you found it. It has to be at least at that same level of finish. And all the work must be finished, and all the work must meet the standards throughout the entire thing. Every standard must be met, all 10 standards. I'd already mentioned the 5-year look back period. And then for projects that are also seeking optics certification, we're asking that you allow a certain amount of time for the SHPO review, and this was part of the new optic rules, revised rules. The SHPO recommendation is required to certify an optic project, and it is a recommendation for the federal credit. The feds make the final decision. So here is our contact information. The State Historic Preservation Office, you see the SHPO review staff. Because, as Elizabeth mentioned, Ohio does a ton of reviews. We have a lot of reviewers. We also have contract staff that do reviews for us. Barb Powers signs all preliminary part 1s. What does that mean? That means if you have a draft National Register nomination, either for an individual building or for a district, you would work with Barb on that. You'll work with a reviewer on my staff, but then the final, signatory for that part 1 is going to be Barb. I sign off on all other part 1s that are for already listed districts. And then my staff and the contract review staff does all part 2s, amendment, and part 3 submissions. To check the project status, all you need to do is visit our website, and you can check that project status. To check the project status with the Park Service, they have a website, and you can check with them as well. But you're always able to reach out to your reviewer and say, hey, just checking in. And believe me, you will hear from your reviewer. They will ask you for additional information. They'll want to talk with you about the project. So you will be hearing from us certainly within the process. Our current National Park Service reviewers are John Sandor and Karen Brandt. John reviews Central and Southern Ohio. Karen reviews Central and Northern Ohio. Here are some recommended websites that you can take a look at. And I am trying to stay on time for Lisa so I don't shortchange her. So I'm just kind of going to scroll through this because you guys will have access to this. And I believe my time is nearing. So Lisa, oh my gosh, can you believe it? I didn't steal 10 minutes of your time. I'm actually on time. And I think, I don't know, but I think we're going to be asking and answering questions at the end. But thank you so much. And we are here to help. And we really appreciate everybody submitting projects for the state and federal credits. It's the way we get historic buildings rehabbed in Ohio. So thank you.
Thanks, Mariangela. And while we're transitioning to Lisa, there's a question I think that we can answer right now for you, Mariangela. It's sort of standards adjacent, I'll say that. So the question is, I work on the Oxford, Ohio Historical and Architectural Commission. We have an 1840s federal style house that had a fire earlier this year. The owner states the cost to repair is more than replacing. What is the standard formula for repair versus replace?
So the material, I don't know that I've ever heard of a standard formula. It's what the Park Service does. They're really good about this. You have to have someone, an independent person, like a structural engineer, an independent person that has no skin in the game, go in and say, this is what would have to be done in order to rehabilitate this building, and this is the cost. We recently did that, oh gosh, it's not been more than a couple years ago, where that actually happened with a portion of a building on a project, on a potential tax credit project. And so a structural engineer went in, they made the determination of what would have to be done and what the cost associated with that would be. And at the end of the day, you might have a situation where the Park Service will say, yes, it is damaged beyond reasonable repair, but the portion that is damaged beyond reasonable repair is so significant that you do need to replace it in kind. You need to replace it to match. There's one other example that isn't exactly parallel to this one, but I'm going to explain it anyway. There was a project a number of years ago, series of projects a number of years ago in Springfield. They were projects that I worked on. And the owner had ownership of the building. The owner had the responsibility to secure the building. Some thieves got in and they took interior trim that was really significant. It was really important, significant interior trim. And it was under their watch. And they had really good photographs because they'd already submitted the part 1. And so in that instance, the Park Service did require a replication of the trim because they felt it was under the owner's watch and they needed to make that right. But there is no specific formula. It's just the information that we get, and then we will certainly coordinate. That's the other beautiful thing about this program, is that we have the opportunity to coordinate with the Park Service a lot. And just so you all know, we make these decisions extremely thoughtfully, because we want to give you the best guidance that we possibly can. So in our office, among our staff, not only do we have dedicated buddies that we can throw ideas off of, and reviewers come to me with questions, and then we have an internal team that we run questions past. And then if we still have questions, then we can bump that up for informal coordination with the Park Service. But that, I want to be really clear, that is done at the SHPO request and the SHPO initiation, and it's for SHPO guidance. Applicants don't do that. Applicants need to come to SHPO first, and we will guide you from there. So I hope that kind of sort of answered the question.
And just a quick follow-up question from Dana on that. She wants to know about SHPO independent party resources that do you have that available if people contact the SHPO about it?
So that's a question I get literally all the time, and it's an excellent question. And we are prohibited from recommending anybody to do work, but Heritage Ohio isn't. So what we tend to do is we say, well, this is the way the work should be done in our opinion. And the next question invariably, this happens a lot in Building Doctor, invariably the next question is, well, who should we have do the work? And we say, contact local places, because they're going to know a little bit better. And we often refer people to Heritage Ohio. And I would be remiss also in not thanking Heritage Ohio for inviting me to come and give this presentation. I really appreciate it. Heritage Ohio has been incredible in spreading the good news about both the state and federal tax credit programs. A long time ago, Nathaniel Kalin, who used to have Lisa Brownell's position, and I came up with this idea, we really need to get out there. We really need to talk about the state and federal programs. They're such good programs. We want people to take advantage of them. And we talked to Joyce about it, and she's like, yeah, we're going to do that. And so she is the one that organizes coffees that we take all over the state. So Heritage Ohio has been super partners with us in this program. So I thank them for that. And I thank them for having me here this morning.
Thank you, Mariangela. All right, now we're going to continue on, but if you have any questions, please continue to type them into the chat box. And I don't believe we mentioned this at the beginning, but in your handout section, you have both presentations, so you have access to all the links Mariangela shared just a few moments ago. All right, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Mariangela, for all of your great guidance for everybody, and thanks for the introductions, and to Heritage Ohio for hosting us all here today. So this is all new for everybody here in this virtual format, but I'm just going to get right started here. Since you can't see me, oh, there we go, there's me. I want to introduce myself a little bit. So I run this program, and I miss your projects so much because we can't go to these site visits right now that I'm forced to do my own historic preservation homework. So this is what I've been doing since lockdown, and I have more empathy for you now, all working on your projects. I've been working on rebuilding windows at my house. So let me give you a little bit of background on how the state preservation program fits in with the federal program that you just learned about from Mariangela. The program has been around for a little over 10 years, and it was designed to work with the federal program that had already been in operation for many years before that. So in the same way, the tax credits are a value that is based on the qualified rehabilitation expenditures. And you'll hear this acronym over and over, QREs. That's what we're talking about, qualified rehab expenditures. Every building, to be eligible for the optic program has to be designated one way or another as an official historic building, not just an old building. All the work gets reviewed to meet the U.S. Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, whether your project is federal only or a state and federal project. If you're applying for both those credits, no matter what, it has to meet those standards. And just like the federal program, the tax credits are dollars that come after you complete your project. Whoops, wrong way. So the state program is an up to 25% tax credit. And we say up to because you, as the applicant, you get to choose how much you're asking for. We'll come back a little bit later about why you might want to ask for less than the 25% that you could, but because it's a competitive program, there's some strategic advantage to doing that. The state has given the program a $60 million annual allocation, and that's split into 2 rounds, one in the spring and one in the fall. So we always have a base of $30 million. Any project has a cap of $5 million as the max that they could ask for. And our partnership for this program is mainly between our agency, the Development Services Agency, and the State Historic Preservation Office. We also partner with the Ohio Department of Taxation at the end. They're the ones who actually issue the credit dollars. So this just gives you a little idea of some of the project types
How are you?
that we see in this program. Everything from,
You were not.
hold on. Oh, there we go. So, everything from large projects like the Levesque Tower to kind of Main Street, small commercial or mixed use projects, schools. We see a lot of schools that get rehabbed into new uses, which is always exciting. Oops. And then this just gives you an idea of where this program has been active in the state. This is only updated through round 23, which was a year ago, but it gives you an idea that this isn't a program only for the largest cities in Ohio. It's really for anyone in Ohio who has historic buildings, and that would include every county in the state. We're working really closely, like Mariangela said, with Heritage Ohio to reach out to some of the smaller communities and help building owners and communities learn how to access the program and how to work through the application process. So this gives you a little snapshot of where we're at now so far. We've approved 475 projects so far, and over 300 have already been finished. So we're excited to see that number inching up. And when you look at the next line there, the historic buildings, it doesn't match the number of projects because some of our projects include a number of buildings that are grouped together into one project. So that's why those numbers don't quite match. And then the last two lines there, the bottom one is the amount of tax credits that have been awarded by the state. The second one up from the bottom, that tells us what the total project cost of these projects are. And the tax credits are just one piece of the financing that goes into making these projects happen. And each project represents a complex stack of things that includes owner's equity and other financing sources, other grants and tax incentives that applicants might bring to the table. So it's really significant amount of investment that's come to Ohio as a result of this program. So to be eligible to apply, the applicant has to be one of two things. They have to either own the building, fee simple ownership, or they have to be a qualified lessee having a long-term lease for the building. The only type of owner who would not be eligible to apply would be a political subdivision. So if the state of Ohio owns a building or a city or a township, they could not apply, but they could lease their building to some entity and then that entity could apply as a long-term lessee. The other eligibility piece is what's called the major factor statement, and that's kind of a but-for requirement. If not for these tax credits, this project would not be possible. And applicants can either say that, without the tax credits, they wouldn't be able to undertake the project at all, or they could also say, without the tax credits, we would not be able to make this significant increase in our investment, and we would not be able to complete the project without these tax credits. So if you've already finished your project, this program isn't for you. With these two partners, we have the building side of things, that's Mariangela's office. We have the dollars side of things, that's our office. So there's a set of deadlines that lead up to the actual application being complete. And on our website, you'll find all the information on this, but I'm just going to go over it briefly. At the very beginning of the round, you have to request a pre-application meeting with the preservation office, and you also have to fill out an intent to apply form for development services. That just tells us that you're planning to apply. There's no risk if you choose not to, and it's not a binding document. It just gives us the heads up, and that's your ticket to play in the round. Then you have to have a meeting with SHPO. That one's required. You have to talk about your building plans with them. We don't require that you meet with us at development, but we definitely encourage it, especially if you've never applied before. And even if you have applied 100 times, we are happy to meet with you and go over everything. We can talk about strategy. We can talk about how the last round went and scoring questions and all those things. So the next part that's due is the historic documentation. This is the part that you turn into the SHPO office, includes information about your building. And then the last piece that's due is the actual competitive application. This has all those eligibility pieces we were just talking about, all the potential economic impact of your building and the financial side of things. So here's the deadlines for the upcoming rounds. We're already part of the way into the fall round. The next thing that's coming up is the competitive application is due on September 30th, and then we'll begin our review period, and those awards will get announced in December. And then we'll get started again at the end of January for the spring round. And these deadlines are always updated on our website. They stick pretty close to these, but they do flex a little bit because of holidays and weekends. So you'll want to pay attention to the actual deadlines that are on there. And we do stick to these deadlines very firmly. So we just can't be flexible so that we can remain fair in the competition. So we have an objective scoring process, and that's how projects are selected to be awarded credits. Applicants can self-score 94 out of the 100 points ahead of time, so you'll have a really good idea of how competitive your project is before you even decide whether you want to apply or not. And that's something we can go over in your pre-application meeting if you want to. And at a minimum, you have to score 50 points, but most people don't have any problem meeting that minimum. And if you do, then you probably have some other issues with your project that we need to address first before you decide to apply. So we'll look at these two areas, the regional distributive balance and the potential economic impact. In a couple slides, we'll get to that part. So each round, we were talking before how there's $30 million that's available in each round. There's a dedicated set aside to small projects. 8% of that $30 million is reserved. This is just so that the more competitive, larger projects don't eat up all the allocation and it leaves some for the little guys. To be small, you can ask for no more than $250,000 in credits, and your QREs, your qualified expenditures, have to be less than 1.25 million. And then there's also a dedicated set aside for intermediate size projects. 25% of our total allocation is dedicated to these projects. To be intermediate, your QREs have to be between 1 and 10 million, and the most you can ask for is $2 million in tax credits. And if your project is larger than that, then you'll be in the general pool, which is whatever dollars are left. So this regional distributive balance area is basically where your building is. So we look at a few different things. We look at how many tax credit awards have come to your city in the past. So places that have gotten fewer tax credit awards will score better here. If you're in a city that's already gotten numerous awards, you'll get the minimum amount of points. Same for county per capita balance. This looks at the amount of optic dollars that have come to your community on a per capita basis. So same thing, the more dollars that have flowed to your community through this credit program, the lower you'll score. This gives the advantage to new communities. The next two questions look at poverty, and we use census data for this. This is the only time you'll ever say yay if you have high poverty in your community, because it will get you more points. But this is just a way to help ensure that these dollars go to the places that maybe need investment the most. We look at on the community level, so city level for poverty rate, and then we drill down to the census tract. And then the last piece in this area is the unemployment rate in your county, and we look at it kind of in a relationship basis. So how does your unemployment rate in your county relate to the unemployment rate for the state of Ohio? Is it higher, is it lower, or is it the same? And if it's higher than the state as a whole, then you get more points there. So the next section, where we look at potential economic impact, there's a lot of different things in the scoring here. This first one, the leveraged investment score, this is, again, another relationship question. So it's a relationship between the amount of dollars you're asking for in tax credits related to the total amount that it's going to cost for you to do this whole project. So the more or the less you ask for, the more your leverage score will go up. So this is where we were talking about, your credit amount is up to 25%. You can choose to ask for less because this scoring measure could be improved if you ask for less. This is one of the few parts of the scoring where a choice you make directly impacts your score. And this is something where when you go through the self-scoring exercise, you can try out some different scenarios and see what works for your project. And this is definitely something that we can talk with you as we do those pre-app meetings. So the next part, and this is a really significant part of the scoring, 15 out of your 100 points, is financing committed. So we want to make sure that the projects get the point advantage if they're ready to roll, if they have all their financing in place. We assume that you're going to get the state credits, we assume you're going to get the federal credits, but how else are you going to pay for your project? Do you have that money committed? Whether that be equity from developers or whether it be traditional financing, we want to see commitments for those sources. Timeliness to completion, it's really just a measure of how long is it going to take you to do your project. Are you a non-staged project, which is basically a 2-year project, or are you a staged project, which is a 5-year project? Now, you get more points if you want to be a non-staged project, and almost no one chooses to be a staged project, but if you want to talk about that, I'm happy to talk about those details as it might relate to your own project. The next one, physical scope, this is really just a square footage of your project, and it's just kind of a stand-in for construction jobs. It's a way for us to understand how much construction employment will come about because of this project. Here the priority goes to larger projects, but because we do those 3 pools, the small, medium, and large pools, the smaller projects are competing primarily against each other first. So, you're a little bit at a disadvantage here, but you also don't need as high of a score to be awarded as a small project as you would with a large project. Vacant property, this is another one of those where 15 out of the 100 points are here. The priority is definitely to buildings that are vacant and are underutilized. If you have a building that's fully functioning right now, you might still be able to be awarded tax credits, but it's harder to be awarded if you can't get all these vacancy points. You know, and the purpose is getting buildings that look like these in these pictures back in productive use for their communities. So, you know, these might look very familiar to you. You might have a building that you worked on that looks like this. These are both projects that have been awarded but not yet completed. Local participation and support. This just shows that your community is on board with your project. There's a few different levels of support here that you can show. The lowest one is a letter of support from the highest elected official of your city or your county. So this usually is in the form of a letter from the mayor. Very simply just says, you know, we support this application to this program by this project. The next step up for 3 points is a financial commitment from either the city or the county. These can come in a variety of different forms. It doesn't have to be very large. It only has to be a very small percentage of your total project cost. But it kind of shows that that community is willing to put an investment in with this project. Tax abatements are by far the most common way, but there's no wrong way to do this. And then for the full 5 points there, if you have both, you get the 3 and the 2. So the last part of the scoring rubric is the cost benefit analysis and the job commitment section. So the job commitments, it's a little bit confusing with that title. It's really a commitment to lease the space. So do you have an end user committed? And if you have a commercial mixed use project like the one in the picture where you've got apartments above, commercial below, for the commercial tenants, we would want to see a letter of intent in place to show that those tenants have committed to that space. It doesn't have to be a signed lease, but it can be if you already have that. But we do want to see a letter of intent to consider that to be committed. For the upper floors, if you have residential, we don't need to see commitments from the actual people who will live there because we know it's too early for that. We just need a commitment from the developer that says the space will be finished as apartments and I commit to lease it when they're done. It's pretty simple that way. So if you can come up with that for your buildings, you can get the full 4 points there. The last 6 points, that last bullet, the cost benefit analysis, this is the only part that you can't self-score by yourself. We run a variety of information through a cost benefit analysis model to kind of come up with an ROI, or return on investment number, that tells us how much the state and local revenue will come back from this investment of tax credits into your project. So we look at things like job creation during the construction period. We want to know how many jobs are going to be in that building once it's complete, in terms of both you as the owner running that building and then also any tenants that might be in that space. How many jobs will be in those businesses? What will their revenue be? How many residential tenants will you have? What will their incomes be? And how much will the value of the building change from prior to rehab and then after rehab, to get a look at you know, how property taxes might change. So all that goes together for those final 6 points. So I'm going to go through quickly here just some tips on completing the application. I don't know exactly who the audience is here and how many of you might be working on an application right now, but whether you are working on one now or you're considering one in the future, these are just a little bit of advice for you along the way. We try hard to update our application guide each round so we can have really explicit directions for how to do each step. But they're only as good as if you read them. And we definitely recommend that you start working on it as soon as you can, so you have time to work through any parts that are difficult or that take a little more time. And know that we are just a phone call away or email away. I try to answer it right away. I'm not out doing site visits anymore, so I'm sitting in front of my computer all day. So if you email me, I'll get back to you right away. We already talked about the deadlines a little bit. We just can't be flexible on those. And this sounds oversimplified, but in the application, please just answer everything that we ask and attach everything that we ask. And that's like half the game right there, is just making it complete, because then we don't have to come back during the cure period and ask for things, because some things can be cured and some things can't. So you don't want the unpleasant surprise of finding out that you forgot to do something and you can't add it later. This is especially important right now. I always talk about this, but right now it seems to be more true than ever. Please, please, please mail things with plenty of time to spare. All of our application is submitted online except for the fee. We do charge an application fee, and that has to come to us on paper. We have to take a check. We don't have any other way of accepting that. And we don't even allow hand delivery at our offices anymore because we're not there. We're still working at home. So this is just an example. Somebody, one round, unfortunately, they mailed it 10 days before the deadline, and it took 12 days to get here, and they didn't track it. But what they did do is they called me a couple days in advance and said, hey, did you get my check yet? And I said, no. And they drove another one up to us. So if you don't track something and you forget to put a tracking number on it, just call me, find out if it's there. Give yourself a day to make sure that it got here. We don't want you to be disappointed because of that. When you do your attachments in the application, we have really long and boring instructions about how to do attachments, but this is why, because when we do our review process, it's me plus a review team. And if you follow the directions, it'll look like on the one on the left there, where everything is lined up in order that the questions are asked on the application, and it makes it really easy for us to find all of the things that you attached. If you give things your own name or you don't call them what makes sense, they get all mixed up and we have to hunt and peck. Like, I don't know what LS 100 is and what that might correspond to. So it improves the time. We're able to go faster if you follow our directions and we don't miss something. And sometimes I'll miss something and I'll cure it for you, and people will get worried. And in fact, they had attached it, but we just couldn't find it. So it's to your benefit to just follow those instructions so we don't miss anything. And then I get this question sometimes: if your application has trade secret information or something you need to redact, you have the right to do that. There's just certain conventions that you have to follow so that we know for sure what you need to redact. One of them, if you look in that upper right corner, there's a little box to check in the application. It just says, does this application include trade secret information? And you click yes or no. And that will put a little check in the box that will tell us, aha, you have to look for it in this application. When you are typing things into those boxes of the application, if you want to put something in there that is trade secret, start the line with a series of asterisks so that that can indicate to us that this is trade secret. The reason you want to do this, if you want to do this, is we often will get public records requests for application information, and because we are a public agency, we release that information. So newspapers or your competitors or whoever else is interested in the community can ask for them. And if you don't mark something as trade secret, but you really wished it was, it's going to get released. And the types of things that people keep as trade secret, it's oftentimes related to their tenants. If they're not quite ready to say that they have a lease agreement with a certain hotel chain or a certain restaurant chain, or they don't want to say who is, I don't know, a partner in this project, whatever it is, you can redact that information as long as we have enough to be able to score it. So if you have an attachment that has trade secret information, this sample of a letter here is what you could do. A lot of applicants will just put a little text box in there in red and say, this entire document is trade secret. And that will indicate to us that if we ever get a public records request, to redact that document and not have that be part of the public release. If you have any questions on this, feel free to talk to me as you're working on your project. We want to work with you on this and make sure that everybody gets what they need. So let's talk a little bit about the other end of the process. When you've been awarded and you finished your project and you actually are getting ready to get your tax credit, how do you use it? It's a little bit different. It's not a tax deduction, which reduces the amount you're being taxed on. It's a tax credit, so that offsets what you would have owed in taxes. There's a lot of different ways that people can use tax credits. If it's a smaller project, a lot of times we'll see the applicant as an individual. We'll use it against their personal income tax liability. Or projects can have a group of investors and they could use it against their individual tax liability, or those investors might include institutional investors like banks or insurance companies. You can pass the credit through from the original applicant to other investors. And they can take what they call a disproportionate share. They might only own 0.1% of the entity, but be receiving 99% of the credits, and that's okay. They can be disproportionate like that. And the Ohio program, this is a big difference between the Ohio credit and the federal credit, is the Ohio program is refundable. So if your tax liability is less than what you are earning in tax credits, the difference will come back to you as a refund. And that's through the Department of Taxation. If your building is owned by a nonprofit or the applicant might be a nonprofit, there are ways to make that work. There's nothing that says a nonprofit can't apply. You just have to make sure that you have a way of making use of the credit as a nonprofit because you don't have any tax liability maybe. So, but there's a variety of different ways that that can happen, and we can talk you through that process. And this is also where I say kind of like Mariangela did, which is, you know, we can't give you all the tax advice here. We will say that you need to make sure that you have the right legal and accounting advice before you apply to make sure that you can make use of the credit in the way you want to. I'm going to circle back to this, what is a historic building, for 1 second to lead in to talking about our pipeline initiative. So a historic building, to be eligible, you have to be listed on the National Register either individually or as part of a district, however the Park Service defines what a district is, or, and this is different from the federal credits, your building can be listed as a local landmark if your community is a certified local government and they have that authority to designate local historic landmarks. So either one of those things would give you eligibility to apply. But if you're listed locally by a CLG, that doesn't let you apply for the federal credits, but it does let you apply for the state. So it's a little bit complicated there, but it's kind of a flow chart of possibilities. But you might be thinking of buildings in your city that are none of these things. They're not listed officially locally, or they're not on the National Register. We have this thing called the Pipeline Initiative. It's a grant program that helps you as a community or as a property owner get your building listed on the National Register. So it helps you put your building in the pipeline for future tax credit assistance. And it helps you offset the cost for getting that building nominated to the National Register. And the way that it does it is by you know, a community or a building owner can apply for money that they would then use to pay a third party to do that nomination work. And there's a few different types of pipeline funding. The first is preparing a nomination for an individual building, and that's a $4,000 grant. There is no match requirement, and it just has to have the support of the property owner. And most of the time the owner is the applicant, but sometimes it'll be like a friends of group or a neighborhood group, or the city itself will apply. That's fine. The second way is for the nomination of a historic district. And this is a grant of $12,000. And this can either be for a brand new district, or it can be to amend an old district. So you might have a district that was nominated in the 70s, and in the meantime, a lot of other buildings have become old enough now, or they've changed their ideas about what is significant, that those boundaries need to be revisited, and they could expand that original nomination. So you can amend an older district with this as well. For this one, you have to have a support of the majority of the owners within that proposed district, and also support from the city in which it is located. The third type of pipeline funding is what we call an integrity investigation. So the typical scenario for this one is you have a district that's already on the National Register, but you have a building that looks like that one on the left there, where it got covered up at some point or altered non-compatibly with the historic fabric of that district, and you're not sure what's under there. If you could take off this covering or remove the alteration to investigate if the building that's under there still retains enough historic integrity to be considered contributing to that district, then that's kind of the purpose of this, is to do that investigation and find that out. And this building, actually, the one on the right there is the finished project. That's what was under the covering. So you can see how this building, it's amazing that that was actually still hiding under there, but this is common. You see this in buildings all over, in lots of districts around the state, where at one point they decided it was a good idea to cover it up. But so who can apply? It's pretty liberal with who can apply. It could be the property owner, it could be a group of businesses or a local government or nonprofit group. We don't have any rounds for this. It's just first come, first serve. And all the applications just come through me via email. It's a really simple process. The only people who can't apply is the consultant who might be preparing the nomination. They can't apply for money to pay themselves to do the work. You have to tell us your budget. What are your sources? What are your uses? And we're only concerned with the nomination process. We're not concerned yet with the actual redevelopment. That's farther down the road. You have to tell us what the grant will pay for and who all the partners are, what your timeline is for it, and then tell us what you think, how this project fits in the larger context of rehabilitation and redevelopment in your community. How does it have potential to apply for tax credits? What else is happening in your potential district, in your community, where this will fit in or help with those goals? You can talk to me about it anytime. And you do need to do a National Register questionnaire, and that's where you make your first contact with the National Register folks over at the Preservation Office. You tell them about your building, and they give you some initial feedback on whether they think it will have potential to be listed on the National Register. And we wait for that green light letter, and if you have that green light letter, then you can apply for pipeline. The form's on our website, and it all comes to me via email, and then it takes us a few weeks to review it and get back to you. And then once you're approved, you're ready to just start working on it. And then the Preservation Office actually administers the grant, so you'll work with them for the rest of the process. So again, I am happy to answer any question anytime. We are all still working remotely. This is my assistant. And email is the best way to get a hold of me. But I just recently figured out with IT how to forward all my calls, so you don't have to rely on my really terrible voicemail skills. So call me and you'll get a hold of me that way too. But I'm really happy to take any questions here. I think we've got, a little bit of time left, and I will leave it up to our facilitators to let us know what the questions are. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, the first question we have is from the other day in our accessibility requirements in multifamily housing and historic building session. And Frank can chime in if I ask this question incorrectly, but this is mostly a Mariangela question. For historic tax credits, what is the reasonable threshold of how much a project can be just the cost of an elevator to be put in a building that needs accessibility requirements?
So am I understanding the question to be, can you get the federal tax credits for just the introduction of an elevator? Is that the question? Okay. So
Mostly,
it all goes
yes.
back to, Frank gave me a thumbs up. So it all goes back to the IRS requirement that to qualify for the federal credits, you have to have a substantial project. The project has to meet the substantial rehabilitation requirement of the IRS. And again, in very quick terms, very historian and not accountant terms, that is what the building is worth minus the land. You have to exceed that value in order to qualify for the federal credits.
Thank you, Mariangela. All right, our next question comes from Polly. Could an 1880 home that is planned to be an income property and has the potential to be in a future historic district qualify for tax credits if it was moved from the original site in 1960?
The answer to that question is it depends. If it is considered contributing to the district in which it's moved to, then there is potential. But that would be a question that I would recommend strongly that you address to Barb Powers in our inventory and registration department at the SHPO office. Barb's name you saw on the slide, she handles all preliminary part ones. She's also in charge of the National Register department, and she would be the best person to talk with about that. But I'm going to segue just for a second into how you can check to see if a building has potential. You can submit a National Register questionnaire. It's a very simple process. It's online. The National Register questionnaire committee meets every week. That's under Barb's department, and we pull in, she pulls in professionals from other departments in the SHPO staff. There are a couple people from my staff that are on that committee, 106 staff that are on that committee. And it's really a good and quick and easy way to determine whether your building has potential eligibility for the National Register. And we strongly recommend that people take advantage of that. And it's free. You just submit that and there's no charge at all for that. In fact, there's no charge at all for any advice, guidance, work that SHPO does with you on any of your projects or any National Register work.
Thank you, Mariangela. We have one last question in the box, but if anyone has any final questions here, just type them in. This is for both Mariangela and Lisa, but kind of in a short synopsis, what would you say to a community or a building owner that has buildings that are capable of projects, but they just think it's too much work to do? Get a tax credit.
The owners are thinking that it's too much work. Is that what they're asking?
Yes.
Well, there's not really a magic answer for that. It's kind of an opportunity cost sort of thing. Like, if your building is working fine the way it is, then maybe it's not worth it to you to do the tax credits to do the repair. But if your building is obsolete and you can't use it and get any good use out of it as is, then even though it's hard work, it's worth it. But if you're a community that's trying to rally your building owners to do more development and they're just sitting on obsolete buildings that are not being utilized, that some of the other sessions in this conference have talked about that. The Van Wert session I'm thinking of in particular, of really putting in the long, hard work of working with building owners one-on-one to help meet their needs as individual building owners, but then meeting that goal of the community. So it is work, and we can't pretend that it's not. It's hard work, but helping them know that we're all here to help them with the hard parts. So I don't know what else to say beyond that.
And this is an opt-in program. That's the beauty of both the federal and state credits. You opt in. Even if you have a building that is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, you as a private property owner using your own money can do anything you wish to that National Register listed building. We can advise you, but at the end of the day, it is your building and you get to decide what to do with it. But if you opt in to a federal program or to the OPTIC program, it's your opportunity. If you were planning to do work that meets the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation anyway, and you meet the IRS requirements and ODSA's requirements, why not try to get some assistance for doing the good work you were planning to do anyway? But it is completely up to you. It is a voluntary opt-in program that, as Lisa said, we're here to help you with. And in Ohio, because we've done so many projects for such a long time and have a pretty good record, the Park Service agrees with us, very, very consistently. And we do try to be consistent, and we try to be transparent, and we try to be helpful. You can at least investigate, you can at least ask the questions, you can at least meet with us. And then if you decide that the programs just aren't for you, then you walk away and you do as you wish with your building. But if you do opt in, No, as Lisa said, we're here to work with you. I sometimes hear, oh, you know, the program is so hard. This program is not hard. It genuinely isn't. You meet with us, you ask us for guidance on the work, we red flag things, we'll give you guidance back. You propose work that is feasible, that meets your program, that meets the Secretary of the Interior standards, which we will work with you to have happen. You get that work approved by us and the feds. You do the work as you received approval for it, and only the work that you received approval for, either through the Part 2 or the amendment process. And at the end of the day, you will receive your Part 3 certification and your tax credits.
Thank you, Mariangela. We have a couple questions on the pipeline, one for, I believe, Mariangela and one for Lisa. We'll start with the one for Lisa. If I had to explain the pipeline program in one or two lines to a group of local historians to raise their interest in it, what would I say to them?
Oh, that is a good question. You could say that the pipeline exists as non-competitive source of funding to help accomplish getting buildings listed on the National Register. So the state wants to give you money to help you list the historic buildings in your community.
Thanks, Lisa. And the other question, I believe, is for Mariangela. I think you'll have a little more insight into this. If your community is a CLG program community, is it better to go through the pipeline project or the CLG program to obtain funding for a consultant to apply for the national district nomination?
It is going to be less competitive because there is no competition right now for the pipeline. So you're definitely going to want to apply for pipeline. The CLG program, Certified Local Government Program, wonderful program. There are CLG grants available for sure, but those are more competitive. You have to apply for those. Whereas pipeline right now, it's basically free money to work on National Register nominations. So that would be my advice.
Thanks, Mariangela. And another one for Lisa now. Must there be a rehab plan to do a pipeline grant?
Well, you have to make a good argument for how this building or how this district will fit in with redevelopment goals. So it has to at least have potential to be redeveloped. And we understand that a lot of the projects that come to us at the early stages in pipeline, there isn't an actual plan in place yet. But if you can argue that it will open the doors to those plans being made, then yes. But if you, for example, if you have a district that's all single family homes, you can't make that argument because those wouldn't be eligible for tax credits anyway. But if your potential district or building would be potentially eligible for tax credits, even if you don't have a plan in place yet, as long as you can make that argument, it could be approved.
Thank you, Lisa. There's a short lull in the questions here. So I believe I'm going to turn it over to Lauren Burge with Prospectus Architecture to give the sponsors last comments on the session. Lauren, when you're ready.
Thank you very much. Really, what a great program today. Thanks very much to Lisa and Mariangela for a lot of information in such a short period of time. It was really, really terrific and very detailed. I do highly recommend that if you are considering a project that you contact the SHPO office early. I can attest that Mariangela and Lisa are both very accessible and very responsive, so they're here to help you. And thank everyone for being with us today.
Thank you, Lauren, and it's great to have you as a sponsor for this session. Just a few parting comments from me here. So just a reminder to everyone, if you need AIA credits or a certificate of completion for this session, email me at officemanager@heritageohio.org. And our 2 o'clock session today, we hope you can join us, is with John Sander, one of our state reviewers with the National Park Service. And he is going to be, let me take a deep breath so I can say all this title. He's going to be revisiting the Secretary's standards for rehabilitation as applied to projects seeking federal tax credits. And he's going to have a particular focus on historic windows in that session. So we hope you can join us at 2 o'clock for that session today. And tonight is our final happy hour at 5 o'clock. It's our preservation hackathon with Kyle Sword of Pilkington Glass and with Daniel Steinhauser, CT Consultants, and we're going to be diving headlong into a project. And also tonight, if you are interested, we'll be announcing our pitch party winner from last night. You can vote for that on our website or on social media until 5 o'clock this evening. I'll turn it over to Lisa and to Mariangela if they have any final comments.
Just thank you very much to Heritage Ohio and to everyone out there who is potentially considering a federal or state historic tax credit program project. Lauren said it really well. Contact us. We genuinely want to try to assist you. We want projects to be successful. We work really hard with you to make them successful. We really view this, as I said, a team effort with us being on the teams, the buildings team. And again, thanks to the partnership that we have with the National Park Service and with ODSA. And once again, thanks to Heritage Ohio for really promoting these programs throughout the state. So thank you very much for having the State Historic Preservation Office. We are part of the Ohio History Connection, and we really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the good work that's going on in history in the state. So thanks.
I couldn't add anything else. Everything that Mariangela said, yes. Call us if you remember nothing else about this presentation, but that, call us if you have any questions. We are happy to help, or email.
Sounds great. Thank you, Mariangela and Lisa, and everyone. Thank you for attending today, and we hope to see you this afternoon. Thank you.